Hey guys, welcome to our channel, where we provide all the essential information and tips to make your UK visa application process smoother. In this video, we will discuss the A2 test for spouse visa extension, which is a crucial step in your visa extension process. If you're looking to extend your stay in the UK with your spouse, then this video is for you. Let's get started. Section 1. Understanding the A2 test. Let's start with understanding what the A2 test is. The A2 test is a very basic English language test. It is a type of secure English language test or SELT that is required for visa extension on a family partner or family parent visa. The A2 level of English requires you to be able to understand sentences related to areas such as work, basic personal and family topics, communicate in simple and routine tasks such as travel, and describe in simple terms your background, environment, and in areas of immediate need. So basically, with the A2 test, the UK government wants to make sure that you can survive in the UK and you can get along with basic conversation in the everyday life situation. Why is it required for spouse extension visa? The A2 test is required when you want to extend your spouse visa. So basically, you have to give the A1 test when you first get your visa, and then after a year of that, you have to give the A2 test. The reason the A2 test is mandatory is because the UK government expects you to have learned some English while you've been here in the UK and to improve your English speaking skills. The A2 test is a very basic English language test which makes sure that you can survive in the UK and you have enough English language skills to get along here. It is required for both family partner and family parent visa extension. What are the different components of the test? The A2 grade 3 test is a one-to-one speaking and listening test. So basically, you have to book your test, and then on the day of the test, you have to show up at the test center where your test will be taken through a video conference device. They will set up a tablet in front of you, and an examiner will ask you questions and have a conversation with you for 7 minutes. The conversation is very basic and very simple. All the examiner wants to know is if you're able to speak English comfortably in everyday situation. How long is the test? As I mentioned, the conversation part is only 7 minutes. But of course, preparing for the test and then showing up at the test center, all of this process will also take some time. How much does the test cost? The test costs £150 for the first attempt. Section 2. Booking your test. This section is very important, so we'll discuss it in more detail at the end of the video. First, let's discuss the Section 3. Section 3. In this section, we'll discuss 20 sample questions and answers to help you understand what type of questions you may encounter during your test. Before we begin with the questions, I want you to understand that the A2 test is an English language test. The examiner is there to test your English speaking skills. He does not want to know anything about you or your family or your personal life. He is just there to check your English language. So whenever he asks any question about you or your family or your personal life, he does not want to know the information about you. He just wants to check your English language and he wants to see if you can answer it in a correct manner. So whenever answering any of these questions, you should make sure that your English language is correct. You have to ensure that you use the correct tense, the correct tone, the correct wording, and overall your English grammar and vocabulary is good. As long as you keep your language good, you don't have to worry about the accuracy of the answer. Because some students take it too seriously and they worry about the accuracy of the answer. For example, if the examiner asks about your education, you don't have to tell them exactly what education you got. You can just say anything that comes to your mind as long as your English is correct. Another thing about the questions is that you should not try to avoid them. Try to answer them as briefly as possible, but try not to make them too short. For example, if you try to answer every question with just a simple yes or no or just a few words, then the examiner might take it as a sign of low confidence in English speaking. And that is not good for you. You have to show the examiner that you're confident in speaking English and that you can survive everyday situations and basic questions. A great way to do this is to repeat the question before answering it. For example, if the examiner asks about your work or your job, you can just repeat the question first and then answer it. Another thing to make sure is if you don't understand a question or you want the examiner to repeat the question, you can totally ask him, and it's totally normal for you to do that. The examiner will not mind it at all. So for example, if there's a question that you did not understand, you can simply say to the examiner, sorry, can you repeat the question please? Or sorry, I did not understand it. You can even ask him to explain the question if you don't understand it completely. For example, if he asks a random question about something that you haven't heard of, you can simply ask him, can you explain please? Or can you elaborate please? And he will explain the question. The examiner is there to help you. He's not your enemy, he's your friend. So make sure you use these tips while answering these questions. And now let's start with our 20 sample questions and answers. For each of these questions, I will give you a sample answer, but you should never copy any given answer. You should always try to adjust the answer according to your situation and your circumstances. So our first question is, can you tell me about your hometown? Now here the examiner is asking you about your hometown and he wants to know if you can use different places in English language. And he wants to know if you can talk about different places in English language. So here I will give a sample answer. For example, I'll say my hometown is located in a small village in India, or my hometown is located in a small city in Nepal, or wherever my hometown is. Next question is, what is your favorite hobby? Now here you can mention any hobby you want. It doesn't even matter if you have that hobby or not, as long as your English language is correct and your sentence makes sense. For example, you can say, my favorite hobby is collecting stamps, or my favorite hobby is gardening, or anything else that comes to your mind. Next question is, what did you study in school? Now, as I mentioned previously, you don't have to be very specific here. You can mention any degree that you have got, or even one that you haven't got. For example, you can say, I studied agriculture for 4 years, or I studied economics, or I studied finance, or I studied biology. The subject does not matter here as long as your English sentence is correct. Next question is, what are your plans for the future? So depending on your study, you may want to change the answer. For example, if in your study question you said that you have studied agriculture, then in your future plans you should mention something related to that. For example, you can say, I'm planning to work in an agriculture company, or I'm planning to work in the agriculture department of the government. Or if you mentioned something different, for example, if you mentioned economics, then you can say, I'm planning to work as an accountant in a private firm. Next question is, can you describe your daily routine? Now, this question is very common. The examiner may ask about your total routine, or he may ask about your morning routine or evening routine. The goal for the examiner is to test your ability to talk about different times and different time of the day in English. So if he asks you about your daily routine, you can give him any generic routine. For example, you can say, I usually wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, I take a shower, and then I have a breakfast at around 7:30, then I get myself ready, and I head out to work at around 8 o'clock. In the evening, I get back at around 5 p.m., I rest a little bit, then I go out for a walk with my dog or my pet. I watch some movies, play some board games with my friends or family, then I have my dinner and I go to sleep. Anything like this. It doesn't have to be accurate once again. Next question is, what type of music do you like? Now here you can mention any type of music that you like or you don't like. It doesn't really matter. For example, you can say, I like classical music, or I like pop music, or you can say, I like all types of music, but I like jazz music the most. Next question is, have you ever traveled abroad? Now here, if you have traveled abroad, you can say, yes, I have traveled to, and whatever country you travel to, you will mention the name of that country. For example, I have traveled to Turkey, or I have traveled to Canada, or I have traveled to Hawaii. But if you haven't traveled abroad, you can simply say, no, I have never traveled abroad. Next question is, what do you usually do on weekends? Now here you can mention any activities that you do on weekends. For example, you can say, I usually go out with my friends on weekends, or we usually play some kind of sport together, or I usually play board games with my family on the weekends, or we go to watch movies on weekends, any activity. Next question is, can you cook? And what's your favorite dish? Now these can be asked separately, but they can also be asked together as in this example. So if you can cook, if you have a favorite dish, you can simply say, yes, I can cook and my favorite dish to make is lasagna. Or if you cannot cook, you can simply say, no, I don't really cook that much. Next question is, can you describe your favorite childhood memory? Now here you can mention any memory that you have. For example, you can say, my favorite childhood memory is of my 5th birthday, where we had a large family gathering and a massive party. Or you can mention something else. For example, you can say, my favorite childhood memory was when we went to Hawaii during summer holidays when I was 14 years old. Anything like that. Next question is, what do you like most about living in the UK? Now here you can mention anything that you like about UK. For example, you can say, the thing that I like most about living in the UK is its weather, as it's really nice and cold. And where I come from in my country, the weather is usually very hot. Or you can mention anything else that you like. Next question is, can you tell me about a recent trip you took? Now here you can mention any trip that you recently took. For example, you can say that last weekend I went on hiking with my friends, or last weekend I went on a picnic with my family, or any other trip. Next question is, what are your thoughts on the weather in the UK? Now once again, it's a personal preference. If you like the weather in the UK, you can say, I really like the weather here. Or if you don't really like it, you can say, the weather is not bad, but I prefer a different weather. Next question is, how would you describe your personality? Now here you can keep it very simple and very easy on yourself. You can simply say, I think I'm a pretty funny guy and I have a decent personality. Next question is, can you talk about your job or career aspiration? Now once again, this relates back to the study question. Whatever you mentioned in your study question, you have to make sure that you stay consistent with it. Your answer should not vary from question to question. You have to keep it consistent. So if, for example, in that study question, if you mentioned that you have studied science or biology, then here you would have to mention something similar. For example, you can say, I aspire to become a biology teacher in a university, or I aspire to become an accountant in a massive firm, or anything like that. Next question is, what do you think is the most challenging aspect of living in the UK? Now here you can mention anything that you find challenging while living in the UK. For example, you can say, the most challenging aspect for me is getting used to the traffic laws because they are different from my country. Or you can mention anything else. For example, if it's the weather for you that you don't really like, or if it is your routine that you really find difficult to stick to, anything that you find challenging. Next question is, can you tell me about a cultural tradition from your home country? Now this will vary a lot depending on where you come from, but you can mention any cultural tradition that you have. For example, you can say, every year we have a massive family gathering and we have a feast in my home country, and that is a tradition. Or you can mention anything else. Next question is, how do you usually celebrate special occasions? You can mention anything like, for example, we usually celebrate special occasions by gathering the family and friends and having a massive party together. Next question is, what type of movies do you enjoy watching? And once again, it's a personal preference question, and you can mention any type of movies you like. For example, you can say, I like all kinds of movies, but I like comedy movies the most. Next question is, can you talk about a book you recently read? Now here, once again, it doesn't have to be accurate. You can mention any book you want. You can simply say, recently read the book Getting Things Done and I found it really helpful. Now in the beginning of the video, I mentioned that you don't need to do your A2 test if you can pass your B1 test, as your A2 test is required for spouse visa extension. The A2 test is grade 3. On the other side, the B1 test is a grade 5 test. So if you think you can pass the B1 test, then you should skip the A2 test and go directly for the B1 test, because you can use the B1 test for your visa extension application. Both the tests have the same fee, £150, and if you pass the B1 test in your first attempt, you will not only save money but also time. It will also help you in the long run with your indefinite leave to remain, as B1 test is mandatory for that. So now let's come back to section 2, how to book the test. You can book your test online through the UK government website. Simply search on the internet A2 test booking online, and you will be able to fill up a form and book your test. What materials are needed to prepare for the test? To prepare for your test, you can read the official UK government book that is recommended by the UK government for this test, and you can also watch some YouTube tutorials and practice some basic English conversation with family and friends. How much time do you need to prepare for the test? It depends on your current English language level. If you're already pretty good at English, then you don't need much time to prepare or practice for the test. But if you're not that good at English, then you might have to put more time and effort in your preparation. As I mentioned, a great way to practice is to practice a conversation with your family or friends. Lastly, I'll give you some tips for practicing and improving your language skills. If your English is not that good, then the first thing you should do is listen very carefully to other people who speak English well. Listening is the best way to learn any new language. You should listen carefully and try to understand what words they use, how they use them, and where do they use them. After practicing listening, you should then practice speaking the language with the correct accent and pronunciation. Once you do that, then you can have small conversation with your friends and family for practice. You can also record yourself speaking English and then listen back to it to try and improve your language. Conclusion. Passing the A2 test is essential for spouse extension visa in the UK. With adequate preparation and practice, you can ace the test with confidence. We hope this video has provided you with all the necessary information about the A2 test and help you prepare better for your spouse visa extension. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more informative videos like this one, and good luck with your test.